And we're live. Hello, Rob. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm great. How are you, Jens?
I'm also great. Great to have you. So before we start, um, little shout out to the non-existing sponsors. So if you would be a sponsor of that show, you would literally be featured right now with a small video, and that's where you would be right now. So if you want to be sponsor of the show, I'm eagerly looking for interesting brands to be featured in this place right now. But let's get into it. So welcome to the live stream, Rob. Welcome everyone who is jumping on the live stream and jumping on as well watching it later on. Who am I? I'm Jens Heitland. I am the host of this show, and I'm an first of all entrepreneur, founder of Heitland Innovation, which is a people-focused organization where I work with innovators from across the globe and across different industries, and look into how do we connect the innovators of the world. And we do that in different ways, working with corporations, working with education, and working with coaches and consultants. But that's not what this is about. This is all about innovation culture coding, where I built a window to the world for independent coaches and consultants working in the innovation sphere. And that's why my guest Rob is with me today. I'm really looking forward to explore your case together. So
Me too. Can't wait.
before we go into the case, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure, thanks, Jens. So my name's Rob. Please call me Rob. Only my closest friends call me teacher. And I always use that joke. So I've been teaching and training for a little over 20 years now. I started out teaching communication skills and language, taught a lot of public speaking. Way back before I started teaching, I did acting training. So there's, that sort of crossover in my background from many years ago. Then after about 10 years of teaching communication skills and language, then I also moved into teacher training. So for the last roughly 10 years, I've been training other teachers. I've trained about 500 people to teach language again and communication skills, mostly at entry level, but also some more advanced training. And after 20 years in the training field, the pandemic really was the catalyst for me to rethink my orientation. And so with a colleague who works in a similar field, we've now started up this consultancy, providing guidance on more effective training for training providers, not limited to language and communication. Of course, that's our specialization. We're experts in communication training specifically, but what we know about training can be applied to a whole range of fields.
Yeah, great. And that fits perfectly to the case today, of course.
I hope so.
Why shouldn't it? So let's go into the case. So the case today is a training company that is well established. They're plus 40 years on the market, of course, successful due to the 40 years of business. They're focused on diversity training. So diversity training for corporations in different ways. They're struggling a little bit. They get negative feedback from the corporations they work with in the moment, and the revenue is decreasing since the last 2 years. So their board and their leadership is looking into how do we turn this around and trying to solve that, trying to get it to the next level. And then they said, hey, there's Rob with his consultancy. What about we hire him and he's supporting us? So that's the starting point. Let's get started on how would you, so they approach you and say, hey, Rob, how can you help us? How do you go about in starting that engagement?
Right. So, I mean, the first thing I do is sit down and have a long conversation, most of which is me listening, because every scenario is different. And, I can instantly sort of guess what's coming down the line for me, because, you've seen this a couple of times. it would be tempting to say, oh yeah, I know what I'm going to see here, and start listing off. But of course, I actually don't know that, and there could be 1,000 reasons why this company is starting to run into some difficulties. So the first thing I want to do is dig as deeply as I can into what's going on. Any trainer knows you don't just deliver a training without first doing some kind of needs analysis. And we take that very seriously. We start by finding out what's up, what's going on with the company. And after a long conversation with whoever's bringing us in, probably management, to find out what their concerns are and what their needs are, I often find myself having to redirect that conversation. Because, of course, even in a training company, even in a company that's devoted to training, the manager, or even the trainers for that matter, are more likely to be experts, in this example, experts on diversity, rather than experts on training. And we see this all the time. Many trainers are far more expert in the thing they teach than they are expert in training as a discipline. So if a manager is coming to me and saying, I think we need to fix this, I think we need to address that, I think we need to do A, B, C, I'm like, okay, I will take that under advisement, but I also want to know why. Why do you want that? What's the concern we're addressing? Because my job then is to go and look closely at what's happening. And I may then, when we're ready, I may come back to management and say, okay, I see these problems. I see why you're concerned. I think this is how you address it. And my proposal for addressing it might be totally different from what they think they need, but I want to make sure that I am addressing the things that are actually causing real pain. Find the pain, and then part of our job is to figure out the right way to address it. Because, if the pain's coming from somewhere, it's probably something that the people inside the company don't fully understand. Otherwise, they would already have fixed it, right? So my job is to come in as an outsider with a fresh perspective and look at what they're doing, and then having talked to this manager, then we talk to the trainers. We would certainly want to observe a couple of training sessions and hopefully talk to some of the participants and get a really clear sense of what they do. And only after we've had the opportunity to do that, then we would come back with a detailed report saying, okay, these things are working great. These things are an area for concern. Here's the low-hanging fruit. This is the stuff that we can address effectively. Here are some options for things that we could do to help you. Which could include trainer training sessions. It could include working with them on their material, on their course design. That depends on what we think their needs are and what they're willing to involve us to do. But basically, they hire us to do what I would call an educational audit. And once we've done this audit,
I would like to double click on that and go deeper into it. So understand the manager. So you're kind of brought in and you talk to the manager, the hiring manager, and then you go maybe with the management team, understanding what they're about. And then you said talking to the trainers and attending maybe trainings. How do you do that? So I just imagine, so the company's under pressure and the trainers most probably feel that. And then there comes the external into the training and sitting there and it's like looking with eagle eyes of what's going on exactly and taking notes. How do you work with that?
It is difficult. I mean, you do have to ask very nicely and be very supportive. I think it's really important when I meet the trainers for the first time. Certainly, I would want to meet them before I sit in on one of their sessions. I don't want to sort of arrive as this total stranger and sit at the back of the room. That would be awful. I mean, this happens, but it's not what we want to inflict on people. So first time I want to probably sit down one-to-one with the trainer who's leading that session and have a chat with them and get to know them a bit. And part of what I'm doing there is making sure that they understand that I'm not there to go back to the manager and say, you've got to fire this person. That's not, we don't work that way. We would, I can't imagine a situation where we would do that unless the trainer was doing something completely illegal. There's always, even if there are real problems, our approach would be, here's how we help you get better at these things rather than get fired. So in that sense, we really don't want the trainer to feel that they're under threat. There's an element of sort of ego threat there as well. Like, it's not just, am I going to get fired? It's also, how very dare you judge my training skills? I've been doing this for years and years. And that's very delicate as well. So we do need to make sure that in that first conversation that the trainer understands that we are interested in their work, that we respect their work, that we respect their perspective, and that we know what we're talking about. Like, there needs to be an element of demonstrating our understanding. So yes, okay, this person does know what they're doing. And that isn't the conversation where we seriously start challenging beliefs that might need to be challenged. It's a conversation where we're asking a lot of questions, taking people seriously and answering their questions, making sure that they feel, okay, this person is here to give me supportive advice, not to tear me to pieces.
Do you then share the insights you get inside that session already, or do you take it away and say, thank you very much for being part of that session, I got a lot of information, so you don't share anything? Or are you like open book policy, like, hey, this is what we have seen, just for you to know what we take out of this room? How are you doing that?
With the trainer themselves, I mean, I'll be taking notes in that conversation. They're more than welcome to see my notes. I'm not going to be writing down, oh, this person's clearly an idiot. It's going to be, it's basically factual stuff about what they tell me. In terms of reporting back to like management, I mean, we could if someone really wanted that, but I don't think it would be particularly relevant because at that stage we don't really know anything. And that's another thing, like training. It's a branch of, it's applied psychology, right? Training is a branch of applied psychology. So things like terminology and what people mean by the things they say are very variable. Like someone could tell me, I use this method. And I'm like, okay, fine. I know what I think that means, but I don't know what this person thinks that means. So until I see what they actually do, it doesn't really tell me very much about their work. It tells me what they think they do. It doesn't tell me how they do it or how well they do it or whether I agree that that's what they're doing. So the purpose of that conversation is to make them feel safe and supported, and to understand where they're coming from as a starting point before I then go and observe the session. And then after the session, I'll also have a bunch more questions. Okay, I noticed you did this. Why was that? So there'll be an ongoing conversation there. And that's where the sort of gently challenging questions. That's interesting. What makes you think that? Where does this belief come from? And starting very common trainer beliefs that are not always true.
Yeah, get it. So how do you then work with the participants? Do you do that inside the same training, or do you do that outside, or like as part of another training?
If we have the opportunity to talk to participants, it would very often be after observing a session. We might just have a quiet chat over coffee with someone and ask them about their impressions of the session. If there's an opportunity to do an in-depth debrief with someone, that's wonderful, but I wouldn't usually expect that to be very practical. And I mean, if it's simply not possible, then we can work with that, because we can tell a great deal simply from observing and from seeing what's going on. We understand. Any expert trainer can see a lot of what's going on just from watching and honestly eavesdropping on the conversations and the activities. We do understand what's going on for the participants. So if it's impossible for us to talk to them, that's still very workable. But ideally, we would have a chat and ask them for their thoughts as distinct from our observations. And then again, that's just more data to feed into our perspective of what's happening here, what's working and what's not.
Yeah. One additional question. So this is now the example where people are like more in a classroom setting or business room setting, whatever. How do you work with them? Because most probably due to pandemic, they have established online presence and doing online courses on top of what they're doing. So how do you work with that? Do you work with the online content, what they have as well? You're just getting a hi from Shrikar, I guess.
Hi, Shrikar.
People from YouTube are dialing in, which is good. So
that's great.
You can always hit us up and comments and send us a like someone just did. So you're welcome to say hello to us. distracting us a little bit in between. And of course, it would be great to hear where you come from and where you're watching this. So how do you work with the online content?
Well, much the same. I mean, in terms of the content, ideally we'll have a look at that right at the beginning. You know, stuff like online videos and training materials. That will be the first thing we ask for after the conversation with management. Let's have a look at your stuff. Let's see what you've got on the Moodle or whatever it is they use. And we'll sort of dig through that and get a good impression of that before we start talking to the trainers, because of course that's going to inform our questions. When it comes to talking to the participants, again, if it can be arranged, ideally it would be nice to set up a Zoom chat, probably one-to-one with a few participants, 2 or 3 maybe, just to get an idea and ask them a few short questions. But that would have to be specially arranged. And of course, it's not always possible. So we work with what we've got.
Yeah, great. We just got another shout out from Facebook. GL, the anti-guru in the house from North Carolina. Hello, GL.
Hey
Still
there.
remember you from our conversations on Facebook. Great to see you. So let's dive into the next part. So you establish that picture, you look into what's going on and what the needs are, what the pain points are, and then you take it into your world where you come up. Let's go. Okay, let's build the picture. How do you do that?
Right. So what we bring to management is a report, and we say, here's what we've seen. Here's how we evaluate what we've seen. You know, not on the level of saying, okay, this train is terrible, this one's okay, but more on the level of, okay, here are the strengths, here are the weaknesses we've seen overall in your materials, in the methodology that we see in the sessions. You know, it's not about pointing fingers at individual trainers. It's about looking at the approach and what we call the teaching culture, you know, how the trainers work, how they think about their work, and also, of course, how they interact with the participants. So we try to give an in-depth perspective on what we have seen from our audit, and tell management, okay, this is what we see, this is where you are. And then packaged into that, it will be a set of proposals. Here are the things that we can do to help you do better, which could include trainer coaching. It could include training sessions for the training team. It could include work with managers. It could include materials review, any combination of those, depending on what seems to be needed, whether it's, you know, a skills gap or a methodology issue or something in the materials that's not quite clicking for people. Maybe they're a bit out of date or whatever. So, you know, there are 100 different ways that there might be issues we would want to address. But what we bring back to management then is, here are our findings, here are our suggestions, here's what it will cost.
That's of course important.
Sure.
Another colleague from that's Srikar again from India. True online is spoiling. Yeah, that's how it works these days. Thank you for watching.
I feel you, buddy.
And of course, everyone on all other platforms would be a big love towards you if you could share it as well, that this is going on right now, because that's bumping up a couple of views for us. And I really would like to feature Rob in the best possible light. Good. So you go back to the management, put the price tag under it. What's happening then?
So basically what we've offered the management is a kind of a la carte menu, and they can say, okay, we'd like to do this and this, that bit's a bit too expensive, or we don't have time or whatever. And we can have a conversation with management about exactly what they want and how it interacts with their needs. What we won't do is, you know, if the management has said something like, oh, we're concerned about attendance and motivation. We think the students are not attending enough. They're not, like in a school, for example, they're not motivated enough. So we want you to run a training session for the trainers on attendance and motivation. Like, I will do that if I think it's needed. But before I'm willing to do that, I want to make sure that really is what's needed, because the person telling me that's needed may be wrong. And that happens quite frequently. And what you then get is the same problem, but with the trainers, that you're putting on this training session where the trainers are sitting there thinking, what's the point of this? This isn't what we need. They very frequently understand the problems better than management does. So, then we come in and say, okay, we've prepared the session for you. And they're like, yeah, okay, whatever. That's never going to work. And that's not what we do. So, what we're offering to management is, here are the things we think will help with the issues you've identified, which may or may not be the same as what the management has originally said they wanted. But it's things that we honestly believe will work. We can sign under them and say, okay, if you do this, we think it will have an impact on that. And then they choose what they want to hire us for. And then we come back and do those things as required.
We got a question from GL, so let's bring it up here. Rob, are you saying that a virtual training with larger groups, say more than 10, is less effective than smaller groups? What do you think?
I don't think it's necessarily less effective. It's an interesting question. Thank you for that. The larger the group, the harder it is to make it effective. And generally speaking, online, it's harder to make a training session effective for any given number of people. It's harder online than it is face-to-face. This is very much a question of trainer skill. Most people can do reasonably helpful one-to-one coaching in a skill that they command. If you're good at skiing, you can probably do a halfway decent job of teaching someone to ski without much training as a trainer. You might or might not do a great job of it, but at least you could. And you wouldn't be a fish out of water, and you can really help someone. But then the larger the group, the more skill it takes to make it work. And at the extreme end, you have the real masters in places like schools, primary schools. You see these people like 35-year-olds, and there's silence and happy little noises of playing and useful activities going on with 35-year-olds. You're like, what wizardry is this? There are easier and harder challenges, and group size is one of the challenges that makes things harder. But if the trainer has the skill to manage a group of that size, it can be pretty nearly as effective as a much smaller group. Of course, the thing that then is missing is the individual trainer attention. But you'd be surprised how important that isn't in the overall effectiveness of the session. You don't necessarily need masses of personal attention from the trainer to benefit from the training process.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot inside the corporate world, where sometimes it's just you get the others working together and like breakout rooms or whatever, and then it's like it's 10 times more effective than me doing a PowerPoint. I've seen that
more than 10. Yes, a lot more than 10.
Understood. I'm considering doing larger groups along with one-on-one training. Thank you. So that's
what Jens said is exactly right. I completely agree with you, Jens. Lecturing, this isn't always the case. It depends on the trainer. But if we see lecturing,
let's go into that.
Have a conversation about this.
Let's go into this. And maybe we use the case as one of the examples to dig into what we have discussed before.
Sure.
The what did you say? The slow death of PowerPoint, or let's talk about that as well. So it's like you go into the company, it's 40 years old, and some of them are very old school. Like very old school. They're lecturing and they're using PowerPoint with 2,000 words on one slide. How would you go about supporting them, turning that into something that's different?
Again, it comes back to trainer beliefs, because trainers often imagine that there isn't much alternative, or that death by PowerPoint is the only effective way, or a perfectly decent way of doing what they're doing. Let's say, for example, the trainer thinks that, okay, I'm sharing information here. I'm simply conveying knowledge. These are things that the participants don't know, and I know these things, so I want these things to go from my head into their head. So I tell them. And a lot of people imagine that this is how it works. Of course, this is how universities have operated for 500 years.
And still do some of them.
Yes, and 500 years ago, it was a perfectly sensible idea. But the technology's moved on since then, and it is now obsolete. Since the invention of the printing press, there is no good reason for lecturing anybody. Literally, and there is now good scientific research showing this quite uncontroversially. If you're going to give a lecture, literally your participants are better off taking the lecture notes and going to the library. The time is better spent in the library. And if they go into the library, they don't need a trainer, right? So what are you being paid for? You're literally wasting your own time and theirs by giving a lecture instead of simply giving them a book and saying, off you go.
Yeah.
They just sort of supervise you to make sure they really read it. Like, you don't need a trainer for that. So, I mean, when I'm having a conversation with a trainer who actually thinks this is the way to do things, I might be a little gentler. Oh, tell me why you think that. And where's this idea? Are you aware of this study which shows, so I'm sort of trying to gently lead them towards. But 99 times out of 100, a trainer doesn't rely entirely on lecturing.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. You record lectures, and if you like listening to things, if it's on YouTube, just it's like an audio book. You can listen to it whenever. And books are great because it's random access. You can flip backwards and forwards and reread. It's so much better than a live lecture. Why would you give a live lecture? Like, scientifically, there is no good reason for doing this. So in fact, there are tons of alternatives, and there are far more efficient ways of getting information across. But a lot of trainers find them simply haven't thought about it. You take it for granted that telling people is the way to give them information. So nearly always, okay, do you ever do any other kinds of activity? Oh yes, that's interesting. So there's a reading task there, and then they answer questions. Okay, that could work. And how can we make that more engaging? Perhaps we could make it interactive, collaborative. So then, if you've got a group of 10 people, do you see the issue with having 10 people collaborate all together in a single group? And nobody's participating because they're all passive. Maybe we could put them in breakout rooms. And so gradually, we have this conversation. We get to the idea that effective use of time in a training session is that the trainer sets up an activity and then the participants go off and do it. And while they're doing it, the trainer monitors everybody to try and see what's going on and keep an eye on things like when's the right time to stop, or who needs help, who's got stuck, who's gone off task, this kind of thing. Keep people on task, and then at the right moment, you stop the activity and you review what they've just done. And then you start the next activity. And that's the entire content of any good training session.
Yeah. So if you
they do an activity, you give feedback, next activity. From beginning to end, lecturing doesn't enter into it.
Yeah. So if you see that inside the training environment, inside that company, you take that to the management team, and they say, yes, we need to fix that. Let's take it to the next level. And then you start with the trainer, like you just said. So you take them literally by the hand, and it's like, hey, let's have a look at the course and how do we restructure. So you really go to that detail, not just, hey, the strategy need to be changed. You really go into depth and say, let's fix it. Let's look into how you can restructure the training course in itself to get effective.
We can provide as much help as they need. I mean, typically, for example, in this company with diversity training, but whatever it is, we're not the experts on diversity. They are.
Yeah.
We're not here to teach them what diversity is, or what the participants need to learn about diversity. Like that's their field of expertise. Our job is to make sure that it's coming over to the participants in a way that's effective. So we could certainly work with them if they need that to revise and restructure their materials. But very often what they really need is just guidance on how to set about restructuring their materials. And, teaching them how to turn a lecture into an activity that the participants can do with a partner and engage their own intelligence in interacting with the ideas and the material, because that's how people learn, not by just receiving information, but by processing and using information to do a task.
Yeah. How do you, if we take it up a level, so how do you then work with the strategic part of So you get an understanding of, yes, there are like in-depth things that's not going to work. It's not like the 21st century way of doing things. And then you might as well uncover that, hey guys, your whole strategy is not fitting to what you're doing. How do you talk about these things? How do you take them to the next level?
Yeah, there are a number of ways that can happen. Part of what we'll ask ourselves in the educational audit is, who is in a position to change these strategic issues? Is it the trainers? Is it the way the trainers work together as a team? Is it a management issue? Do we need to go back to the management and say, hey guys, guess what? The problem is you. Again, we'll be nice about it, but we will be honest. So, for example, one thing you could see is like a cultural issue. That's, maybe there's something in the sort of collective attitude to what they do as trainers that isn't working for the participants. And we might be a bit less likely to see that in a company that does something like diversity training, but you see it very frequently in other types of training, like, for example, I could say first aid training or any kind of vocational professional training. Very often, you can see a culture develop where there's a very narrow view of their role. And trainers or managers start to think, okay, your job is to teach first aid. Your job is to teach the job, whatever it is. And that's that. So just teach them to do this thing, and then that's all we need to care about, and that's all we should be concerned about. And it simply doesn't work that way. Brains don't work that way. Humans don't work that way. Have you noticed, Jens, that the trend these days in HR is that the person at the top of the HR branch of the company is not called HR director anymore. They're called what is it? Culture, Learning and Development Director. Have you seen that?
Yeah,
that's
I've
like the
seen
new
it the
cool
other
thing.
days. What was it? People and Culture Manager. People and Culture something. Yeah. Sometimes
and of course,
it's even not manager anymore, because that's not fitting to the future.
Sure, people and culture leader. And sometimes that's lip service, but the idea behind it is spot on. As a principle, as a guiding principle, that's exactly right. If you are doing training, you are inescapably defining the culture of the organization. You are shaping culture, you're shaping organizational culture, whether you want to or not, and whether you know it or not, you are doing that. You might be doing it incompetently, you might be doing it in the wrong direction and creating a culture different from the one you want, but you cannot not be creating culture. So an effective trainer is aware of the wider organizational cultural implications of their activities and the impact on the human beings in the room beyond simply learning how to do X. It's also, what effect is this having on people's motivation? Are we engaging them emotionally? Do they feel like they care about doing it right? Do they see a reason to care? Are we coaching and guiding them to care about one another and to be supportive to one another? This is something trainers can and must do, and if we don't, we can have the opposite effect.
Yeah. And I think that's then super important as well. If we look at the strategic approach, if you see that like there are things misaligned, it's not going to come together in a proper way. So you're off to the wrong direction, and you're not supporting to create that culture. Because if we flip that around, or not flipping it, if we take what you just said as trainers shaping culture, if you're a training company, you're a culture company. Kind of like you support the organizations you work with or the individuals who come to that training to form culture.
Yes. Diversity training is a great example of that.
If
you bring in a diversity training company, you're asking them to have that shaping influence on your organizational culture, which is great because, shaping culture is difficult. And if you're if you're manufacturing nuts and bolts or whatever it is, then you probably don't have in-house experts on culture because that's not what you do. You're engineers or something. So it stands to reason that, there are companies that need to bring in outside expertise in the form of trainers to do that cultural shaping, which the managers may not be experts in. And then similarly, that's where we come in as well, because sometimes the training company themselves gets off track and maybe loses sight of whether it's current thinking on training methodology, or the current findings on the psychological findings on the interaction between training and the work and the culture and the human beings and how people feel about the work. All of these interlocking elements. As trainers, it's possible to lose sight of that if you're very focused on teaching this thing, teaching people to do X. Well, it's not all about X.
Yeah, and it's at least what I have seen when I was trying to teach. I can't even call myself a teacher proper. It's often like I'm lazy. I try to establish something that has worked one time, like the PowerPoint, and then reusing that PowerPoint as often as possible because it works. So,
yeah, and that's not lazy. Laziness doesn't exist. There is no such thing as lazy. There's a question of how motivated someone is. If they're not motivated, why not? There's a question of how much time you have.
Yeah.
There's a question of, and this applies to trainers too. You got this PowerPoint and it worked.
Yeah.
Right? It did a job and no one yelled at you.
People didn't leave that room.
Yeah, no one walked out in disgust. People said, "Oh, thank you, Jens. That was lovely. I've learned so much." All the polite things people say at the end of a session.
Exactly.
That's very nice, but it doesn't tell you anything because unfortunately people just say that because they're polite. And sometimes I say it in all sincerity, and it still actually wasn't a very good session and that's another thing you see with trainers. There's a thing called personality teaching, where your participants love you because you are charming and delightful.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether you've actually made effective use of the time or not.
That's sometimes the benefit I have because I'm doing a lot of shows and podcasts, and I'm one of the biggest compliments I ever got from a very big HR manager. You're likable from the first get-go. That was his and I said there, thank you very much. I can use that for business.
Yeah, and that's wonderful. And don't get me started about managers. Okay.
So JLS just commented, most managers are obtuse. Lol.
Lol, indeed.
Out loud. For those who don't know what that means.
Everyone's obtuse about something, right? People have a focus. People have things that they care about, things that they know about. Nobody can be focused and engaged with everything. That's why you have specialization. That's why you have people like me who focus on a different thing from what you guys do. And so then we can help you. Okay, let's see it from this perspective and help you do it better. So coming back to the question, I've lost my thread now. We were talking about, trainers who, good enough. I remember. Yeah. So you've got this PowerPoint that does a job. Everyone was nice about it. No one yelled at you. People said polite things. You didn't lose the contract. Happy days. And we see that a lot with trainers too. This is good enough. Why fix it? Oh, sure. Good enough for what? A lecture might be good enough in the sense that people enjoy it, people find it interesting. It doesn't hurt to be likable, have an interesting voice, speak enthusiastically. Everyone has a lovely time. It's entertainment. Fine. But what's the outcome? What's the impact of what we're doing here? And part of my job is to, when I work with trainers, is to help them consider what more is possible in the available time. Not, is this good enough that no one yells at you? But is this the best possible thing that we could be doing with this time? Is this having the biggest possible impact? Is this doing the maximum? Is this moving us as far as we possibly can move towards our aims, towards our goals? And in the case of a PowerPoint, the answer is nearly always no. and then my job is to help the trainers see what more is possible and how to get there.
So
very often that means heavy reworking.
Yeah, I was about to say that means you're like need to go into the infight, like literally coaching the person and saying,
Yeah.
let's go into it, deconstruct your beliefs, your understanding of and maybe as well fears of why do they, like if you take myself as the example, why should I change the PowerPoint? I have no idea how to do other things. And I'm not a trainer, but I most probably is like, I did PowerPoint the last 20 years. Why should I change it?
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. I mean, a big part of it is often the fear of not knowing what else to do. And that's why we really can help, because it's not terrifically hard to learn to do something different, especially for a person who is, after all, an experienced trainer. We see this a lot in the kind of, let's say, in organizations that do training outside educational institutions, right? If you go to a primary school or a secondary school, these are people who have very high level of professional training. They know, I mean, they're not all brilliant at it yet, especially the rookies. It takes a long time to get really good at teaching, but these are people who have been trained to do it right, we hope, depending on where they studied and all this stuff.
If you ask me about my teachers, I wouldn't say so.
Well, no, exactly. And I mean, goodness, if you think about my school teachers, we're going back quite a number of decades, and then
same with
what
me.
They learned to do was decades out of date when they learned it. But by contrast, in the sort of corporate training world, you very often have people working as trainers who have had very little training in how to be a trainer. Like, they did a 3-day or a 5-day course once upon a time, and now you're a trainer, and now you just go and learn from Nelly. And Nelly's okay, Nelly's lovely, but Nelly isn't actually that much more competent than the first trainer. And that's really a problem, because it's actually really hard to imagine what good training, really good training, looks like if you haven't seen it. And most people have never seen it. Not because you've never experienced it, but because if you're experiencing it as a participant, you actually can't see it. You're far too busy. If you're in a mediocre training session, you're listening to someone's death by PowerPoint, you can twiddle your thumbs and watch everything the teacher's doing and see what's going on. It's perfectly easy to see what's happening in a bad training session. But if you're in a good training session as a participant, you're far too busy. You're deeply, deeply engaged and occupied. You're in a state of flow, doing the thing you're doing, learning stuff, actively learning stuff. And if you're busy doing that, you're far too preoccupied learning to actually see what the trainer's doing to make that possible. The only way to see good training is to sit out and observe from the sidelines. And bearing in mind that good teaching and good training are not all that common. I mean, you can find them. You do get them. You do get good teachers in schools. They exist. But, you've probably experienced good teaching, good training as a participant, but most people haven't seen what good teachers and good trainers do when they're doing good teaching and training. The way to do that is to spend hours and hours and hours observing, not participating, observing training sessions. Most people haven't. So then, it can be hard to get there by yourself. That's why trainer training is really important. But for someone who's been training people for decades, very often the stuff that you get from experience, they do have. Things like awareness of the participants, like trainers do develop this Jedi mind trick that someone was just commenting about.
JL, and he's even saying that he is Jedi.
Yes, it helps. They talk about school teachers having eyes in the back of their head, this ability to see what's going on and sort of instantly home in on, okay, those two people aren't engaged. That person's not really listening. That person's doing something else. And make on-the-spot decisions about how to maximize the engagement of everyone in the room. Okay, I need to go over there first. I need to deal with that. And having this sort of antenna, this radar almost, 360-degree awareness, even while you're talking to someone, you sort of continue the conversation. You need to know what's happening on the far side of the room. Most trainers have learned that from experience. And they often have a very good sense of what participants struggle with, what they need, what they don't understand right away, what kind of help is going to be helpful. So it's not the case that we have to start from zero and teach them everything. That would take years and years. Instead, very often it's just equipping them with a few basic principles that they may never have thought of. Have you tried doing it this way? Look, it works like this. Let's have a go. Now, how would you transform this lecture into an activity like this that could work this way? Let's have a go together. Now you try the next one. Right, now let's practice. I'll be your participant or whatever. And gradually you can coach them to do that. Once they see, okay, yes, this isn't rocket science. I can do this. I can reimagine my material in this way. Then they can very quickly start to apply it quite effectively. So it's very often the fruit is quite low hanging, and you can have a very big impact on how successful the training is with an experienced trainer who just needs to learn a few techniques to flip the dial from very poor to very good.
Yeah. And the interesting part, I'm just going back to using your process steps. I'm even not sure if you use them process steps, but it's literally you engage with them, understand where they are. You talk to the managers, you talk with the trainers, you engage with the participants to get an understanding. Like you said, you're literally doing an audit of what's the status quo on their training. And then you look into what are the different things you see, what are the different pain points. And then you're going back to the management if the management is engaging with you, and then showing them all the different pain points in the menu, where it's like, hey, we have seen this, and this we could solve in that way. And if then they're okay with that, then you literally would get hired and supporting them solving that. And that's literally what we did the last 25 minutes, using different ways of how you would engage with the trainer, with the strategic approach, and as well, like we just finished up, is going into depth on how do you change the training approach and how do you educate the trainer in a way that they are able and capable to teach better. And bringing that back up is, if we then take the case, is you would help that organization looking at it from strategic to detailed level and help them across that. So it's not just, if we take other consultants, specifically the big ones, they would come in and say, hey, you need to change the process, and that's the strategy you should be using, and off we go. And that's the training methodology. So what you do is really going into depth and understanding what a trainer is doing and how that's going to work, and analyzing it and supporting them as well in solving it, not just saying that's wrong. So if I understand that right.
That's right. It is very bespoke. We don't believe in made-to-measure processes or made-to-measure interventions. There are some obvious basic fundamental elements that an intervention might include, whether it's training sessions or coaching or whatever. But what those need to contain is always going to depend on what we're dealing with and where people are starting from. We do have made-to-measure training courses for trainers. There's this for beginners and there's this for people with experience. And then we have a process of deciding whether people are starting the right course and what are they ready for. But when we're coming into an organization like this, we really want to see, okay, regardless of whether you're ready for this course or that course, that's not the question. Where are you? What do you do well? What do you do poorly? And how do we address the issues? And that will be different every time. So it would be daft for us to come in with a ready-made template and say, do this. Some people might need that. For other people, it might be too much and they're not ready for it because they need some more basic stuff. And for other people, they're already doing all of that stuff and it would be wasting their time. We don't want to do that. That's not what we're there for. Why would anyone pay us for it? We're not a big name consultancy. We don't get paid piles of money just to exist. If we're gonna get hired, we need to offer value. So we need to look very closely at what's happening. We're talking about interactions between humans. There's no template for that. Humans are complicated. They're all different. Of course, it has to be bespoke.
Love that. So I would like to close the case. And of course, as usual, I haven't even mentioned it yet. On the website, heitlandinnovation.com, there is an area which is called Innovation Culture Coding Show. And you will find, Rob, the show notes, the videos, the clips, everything what we talked about today inside of that website, and as well all other coaches and consultants who have been part of the show so far and will be part of that. And that, of course, is another opportunity to show the non-existing sponsors. So imagine you would be sponsors. You could be featured right now with your logo, and that could look in different ways. I just have a placeholder which looks like this. So imagine that's your logo here. Yeah. Having said that, let's get back to it. We got a comment. Let's see who that is. JL. So would an assessment from a work well to pre-qualify folks?
I'm not sure what you're asking about, JL. Are we talking about participants or are we talking about trainers here?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm all in favor of forms and like questionnaires for gathering data, but in our line of work, that's never going to be enough information. I mean, when we're, if we do have a sort of participants, okay, probably yes. Then in a training program, usually your training program isn't bespoke. Usually you have something off the shelf. You have we do this session, we do this series, this course, this series of sessions. So at the start, you need some information about where the participants are, what do they already know, what do we need to spend a lot of time on, what can we maybe shorten, so that you can hopefully make some adjustments to the course at least in response to what the participants need. But depending on the program, like if it's like a half day or a 1 hour session, then yes, a form is all you're going to be able to do. Practicality is a thing. But if it's a longer course, if we're talking about full time for a week or longer, usually I would want to have one-to-one conversations with them. Certainly on our trainer training programs, whatever we're doing, even if it is a sort of standard form, we talk individually for like an hour to every participant to find out exactly who they are and where they're coming from. Make sure that they're going to benefit from the experience, because we don't want to be people to be wasting days or weeks of their lives doing something that either they're not ready for or that's just too basic for them. But yeah, if you're doing like a 3 hour session or something, obviously then an entry form for your participants will tell you something about what they know and who they are and what their background is. And that can give you enough advanced information that you can then build on that. Even here's a really simple example. Quite apart from methodology, here's a totally basic thing. If you possibly can, if you have the opportunity, memorize the names of every single participant before you arrive.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Or plan B, it's often not possible. So plan B, memorize all the names in the first 15 minutes. And that sounds incredible. I mean, if you've got 30 people in the room, it sounds incredibly difficult. But, if you're a trainer with years of experience and you've been practicing doing that all that time, you'd be amazed how fast you could learn that stuff. Like 15 minutes is enough if you're good at it. If you really practice, it's a skill. You just train it. But if you have photos as well as names, just learn them. And if you can say, okay, Sandra, what do you think? And you've never interacted with Sandra before, and she's like, oh, he knows who I am. Then it's such a simple thing to do, but it makes people feel seen. It makes people feel like this is a human being who cares who I am as an individual and doesn't just see me as another participant, but they see me. Corollary of that, as well as learning their names, if you've got like an international group with people from different countries, make sure you can pronounce the names correctly.
Oh, yeah.
First time, it's okay to get it wrong, but then you ask them, okay, how do you say your name? And then get it right. I have never met a person who doesn't hate having their name pronounced wrong. And it's not that hard to do. Just really make the effort so that the humans in the room feel that you see them as humans in the room. Remember, yeah, I sympathize. I mean, it can be really hard. I'll give you an example. I once had a trainee teacher whose name, she was Chinese. Her name was Yu, and Y-U, pronounced Yu. And it had to be pronounced Yu, because if I said Yu, then that was a fish.
Yeah.
And this was definitely not her name. So Yu was wrong. It had to be Yu. And for an English speaker, imagine how hard that is.
Yeah.
Every time I mentioned multiple names, including hers, I had to remember to put her at the end of the list so I could say like Sandra and Jane and Ooh. And then I would say it correctly. But if I said Ooh and Sandra, then I was calling her a fish again.
Yeah.
That's hard work, but
Yeah.
it's worth doing. It makes an enormous difference because then this person feels that you see them as a human being and you care about who they are individually. It's compared with the effort it takes to get it right, the payoff is enormous.
Yeah, they will never forget you. I agree.
Exactly.
I have been living in Russia where I needed to learn a couple of names as well, which I was not familiar with, as you can imagine. So let's get into the last part where I am always ask the coach and consultants, what is your dream client? So tell us, what is your dream client? Imagine you could decide to work with a company. How would that company look like, feel like? What would they do?
Well, I mean, we talked about this the other day, and I even named the company. I said, I know who I want to work with.
You can say it's a company like.
Yeah, so the example I gave Jens the other day when we were discussing this was Stonewall UK, which is a charity that does diversity training. That's why we use that in the case. And they go into companies and do diversity training for LGBTQ issues. Help people to understand their colleagues who might be trans or gay or whatever. This is a big thing for them. It's a big part of what they do. And I understand they do an excellent job, but my dream would be to work with them and help them make their training sessions even more effective and even more memorable and more powerfully moving, because something like diversity training, it's not just about learning how to do X. That is necessary and important, but it's also about shifting people's emotions and motivations and shifting people's attitudes. And that's where we get into the whole sort of experience design, transformative experiences that Jens and I are both into.
Yeah.
That's where that comes in. Very often a good training experience is going to need to be a transformative experience in order to deliver the kind of behavior change that you really want. So that's a good example for me. But actually, I love working with trainers. They're my kind of people. And another good example could be a department of a further education college or a university. Very often they have their own in-house people, but sometimes these institutions do need an outside perspective. They can get very set in their ways. And of course, I mean, again, I work in adult education. I've never done much with kids. That's not my department. I wouldn't ever go into a high school or a primary school. But when it comes to teaching adults, it's so neglected. You know, that it's not valued as a discipline in the way that teaching children. You know, people care about getting it right. If you're teaching kids, then you're supposed to need to know what you're doing. There's like a professional regulatory body. You can get struck off if you're terrible, and so on. And you have to qualify to show that you can do it right. But when it comes to teaching adults, you barely need to do anything. You just, okay, I'm an adult educator now. Okay, fine, off you go. And you know, not everyone who's ending up in that role really knows what they're doing. So I'm inspired to go out in the world and help the people who train and educate adults to do a truly competent job. Teaching is a deep skill. There's a mastery to it. But there are many people out there who have already done a lot of the work to get towards mastery and just need some more basic guidance on the fundamentals that they may have been getting wrong for a very long time. Yeah. And if I can help them to sort of swallow their ego enough that we can have a supportive conversation about that and say, okay, now let's try it this way. And then they try it. Oh my God, yes, this works. Then it can have a really huge impact on how beneficial their sessions are.
Yeah. So if you feel and hear yourself inside what Rob just explained, go to the website heitlandinnovation.com. There's the show, which is called the Innovation Culture Coding Show, and Rob is profiled there. You will find him with all the other coaches, and yeah, there's a link towards him and his universe. So please go to that site. There was one comment which I love to highlight as well, because JL has been commenting the whole time. Thank you very much for that. And he would like to work with the nonprofit companies because he's starting a nonprofit company himself. So good luck with that. If we can be of any support, JL, just text me and maybe I can bring you up on one of the future shows. Happy to discuss. Having said that, last shout out to the non-existing what is sponsors. So if you would be sponsor of this show, you would be shown right now with all the different logos you can see here, which are non-existing. So I'm looking for sponsors of the show, which will be featured in different ways. Go to the website, which is the same website, heitlandinnovation.com, and Innovation Culture Coding. You will see you will see the same picture I just shared, to enable people to be visible. So I'm all about making independent coaches and consultants working with innovative topics visible towards the wider world. And if we combine our superpowers, we all will be better off, because I truly believe that individual people like you, Rob, or JL, who was texting us today, you can make a difference. And I think that's the power we can create if we all do that together and feature each other. That's it for today, Rob.
Thank you so much for having me, Jens. It's been a huge pleasure, and I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Me too. Was a pleasure. For everyone listening and watching, was great to have you. Would love to get a couple of comments more. Go to the website, hook up with Rob, contact him, ask him question, engage with him, engage with us wherever you see this, wherever you watch it afterwards. And we're eager to contact you back. Thank you very much, and see you next Tuesday, or I know next week is Thursday. From September on, we do this every Tuesday and every Thursday. So thank you very much, and see you in the next show.